Hi, friends. Thanks for coming back to join me to read chapter 17 and probably 18 tonight of The Scarecrow of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I don't know what our friends are going to be up to today, but yesterday when we left, the Scarecrow was getting ready to go conquer King Krewel. So he had walked into the castle and he was getting ready. So let's see what happens from there. I must now tell you what had become of Button Bright since he wandered away in the morning and got lost. This small boy, as perhaps you have discovered, was almost as destitute of nerves as the Scarecrow. Nothing ever astonished him much, nothing ever worried him or made him unhappy. Good fortune or bad fortune he accepted with a quiet smile, never complaining whatever happened. Theirs was one reason why Button Bright was a favorite with all who knew him, and perhaps it was the reason why he so often got into difficulties or found himself lost. Today, as he wandered here and there over the hill and down the dale, he missed Trot and Cap'n Bill, of whom he was fond, but nevertheless he was not unhappy. The birds sang merrily, and the wild flowers were beautiful, and the breeze had a fragrance of new mown hay. The only bad thing about this country is its king, he reflected, but the country isn't to blame for that. A prairie dog stuck its round head out of the mound of earth and looked at the boy with bright eyes. Walk around my house, please, it said, and then you won't harm it or disturb the babies. All right, answered Button Bright, and took care not to step on the mound. He went on whistling merrily until a petulant voice cried, "Oh, stop it! Stop that noise! It gets on my nerves!" Button Bright saw an old gray owl sitting in the crotch of a tree, and replied with a laugh, "All right, old fussy," and stopped whistling until he had passed out of the owl's hearing. At noon he came to a farmhouse where an aged couple lived. They gave him a good dinner and treated him kindly, but the man was deaf and the woman was dumb, so they could answer no questions to guide him on the way. So we don't really say that anymore, but deaf means you can't hear and dumb means you can't speak. So today they might say deaf and mute instead of deaf and dumb. Just so you guys, they gave him a good dinner and treated him kindly, but the man was deaf and the woman was dumb, so they could answer no questions to guide him on the way to Pon's house. When he left them, he was just as much a loss as he had ever been. Every grove of trees he saw from a distance he visited, for he remembered that the king's castle was near a grove of trees and Pon's hut was near the king's castle, but always he met with disappointment. Finally, passing through one of these groves, he came out into the open and found himself face to face with the orc. "Hello," said Button Bright. "Where did you come from?" "From Orkland," was the reply. "I found my own country at last, and it is not far from here either. I would have come back to you sooner to see how you are getting along had not my family and friends welcomed my return so royally that a great celebration was held in my honor, so I couldn't very well leave Orkland again until the excitement was over." "Can you find your way back home again?" asked the boy. "Yes, easily, for now I know exactly where it is. But where are Trot and Cap'n Bill?" Button Bright related to the orc their adventures since it had left them in Jinxland, telling of Trot's fear that the king had done something wicked to Cap'n Bill, and Pod's love for glory, and how Trot and Button Bright had been turned out of the king's castle. That was all the news that they had, but it made the orc anxious for the safety of his friends. "We must go to them at once, or they may need us," he said. "I don't know where to go," confessed Button Bright. "I'm lost." "Well, I can take you back to the hut of the gardener's boy," promised the orc, from whom for when I fly high in the air, I can look down and easily spy the king's castle. That was how I happened to spy you, just entering the grove. So I flew down and waited until you came out. "How can you carry me?" asked the boy. "Well, you'll have to sit straddle my shoulders and put your arms around my neck. Do you think you can keep from falling off?" "I'll try," said Button Bright. So the orc squatted down, and the boy took his seat and held on tight, for the skinny creature's tail began whirling up. They went far above all the tree tops. After the orc had circled around once or twice, its sharp eyes located the towers of the castle, and away it flew straight toward the place. As it hovered in the air near by the castle, Button Bright pointed out Pon's hut, so they landed just before it, and Trot came running out to greet them. Gloria was introduced to the orc, who was surprised to find Cap'n Bill transformed into a grasshopper. "How do you like it?" asked the creature. Why, it worries me a good deal, answered Cap'n Bill, perched on Trot's shoulder. I'm always afraid of being stepped on, and I don't like the flavor of grass. Can't seem to get used to it. It's my nature to eat grass, but I begin to suspect it's an acquired taste. Can you give molasses? Asked the orc. I guess I'm not that kind of a grasshopper, replied Cap'n Bill, but I can't say what I might do if I was squeezed, which I hope I won't be. Well, said the orc, it's a great pity, and I'd like to meet that cruel king and his wicked witch and punish them both severely. You're awfully small, Cap'n Bill, but I think I would recognize you anywhere by your wooden leg. Then the orc and Button Bright were told all about Gloria's frozen heart and how the Scarecrow had come from the land of Oz to help them. Orc seemed rather disturbed when it learned that the Scarecrow had gone alone to conquer King Krewel. I'm afraid he'll make a fizzle of it, said the skinny creature, and there's no telling what that terrible king might do to that poor Scarecrow, who seems like a very interesting person, so I believe I'll take a hand in his conquest myself. Wow. Wait and see, was the reply. But at first I must fly home again, back to my own country, so if you'll forgive me leaving you so soon, I'll be off at once. Stand away from my tail, please, so that the wind from it, when it revolves, won't knock you over. They gave the creature plenty of room, and away it went like a flash, and soon disappeared into the sky. I wonder, said Button Bright, looking solemnly after the orc, whether he'll ever come back again. Of course he will, returned Trot. The orc's a pretty good fellow, and we can depend on him. And mark my words, Button Bright, whenever our orc does come back, there's one cruel king in Jinxland that'll wish he hadn't. There's Button Bright. He's thinking about what's going on over there. Okay. Wow, that one chapter went fast. Chapter 18. The Scarecrow meets the enemy. I wonder what's going to happen now. The Scarecrow was not a bit afraid of King Krewel. Indeed, he rather enjoyed the prospect of conquering the evil king and putting Gloria on the throne of Jinxland in his place. So he advanced boldly to the royal castle and demanded admittance. Seeing that he was a stranger, the soldiers allowed him to enter. He made his way straight to the throne room where, at that time, His Majesty was settling the disputes among his subjects. Who are you? Demanded the king. I'm the Scarecrow of Oz, and I command you to surrender yourself my prisoner. Why should I do that? Inquired the king, much astonished at the straw man's audacity. Because I've decided you are too cruel a king to rule so a beautiful country. You must remember that Jinxland is a part of Oz, and therefore you owe allegiance to Ozma of Oz, whose friend and servant I am. Now, when he heard this, King Krewel was much disturbed in mind, for he knew the Scarecrow spoke the truth. But no one had ever before come to Jinxland from the land of Oz, and the king did not intend to be put on out of the throne if he could help it. Therefore he gave a harsh, wicked laugh of derision and said, I'm busy now. Stand out of my way, Scarecrow, and I'll talk with you by and by. But the Scarecrow turned to the assembled courtiers and people and called in a loud voice, I hereby declare in the name of Ozma of Oz that this man is no longer ruler of Jinxland. From this moment, Princess Gloria is your rightful queen, and I ask all of you to be loyal to her and to obey her commands. The people looked fearfully at the king, whom they all hated in their hearts, but likewise feared. Krewel was now in a terrible rage, and he raised his golden scepter and struck the Scarecrow so heavy a blow that he fell to the floor. But he was up again in an instant, and with Pon's riding whip he switched the king so hard that the wicked monarch roared with pain as much as with rage, calling on his soldiers to capture the Scarecrow. They tried to do that and thrust their lances and swords into the straw body, but without doing any damage except to make holes in the Scarecrow's clothes. However, there were many against one, and finally old Ghoulie Goo brought a rope which he wound around the Scarecrow, binding his legs together and his arms to his side, and after that the fight was over. The king stormed and danced around in a dreadful fury, for he had never been so switched since he was a boy, and perhaps not even then. He ordered the Scarecrow thrust into the castle's prison, which was no task at all, because one man could carry him easily, bound as he was. Even after the prisoner was removed, the king could not control his anger. He tried to figure out some way to be revenged upon the straw man, but could think of nothing that could hurt him. At last, when the terrified people and the frightened courtiers had all slunk away, old Googly Goo approached the king with a malicious grin upon his face. Uh-oh, he's evil, so I'm sure he's going to think of something bad they can do to the king. Scarecrow. "I'll tell you what to do," said he. "Build a big bonfire and burn the Scarecrow up, and that will be the end of him." I told you he'd think of something wicked. The king was so delighted with this suggestion that he hugged old Googly Goo in his joy. "Of course," he cried, "the very thing. Why did I not think of that myself?" So he summoned his soldiers and retainers and bade them prepare a great bonfire in an open space in the castle park. Also, he sent word to all his people to assemble to witness the destruction of the Scarecrow who had dared to defy his power. Before long, a vast throng gathered in the park, and the servants had heaped up enough fuel to make a fire that might be seen for miles, even in the daytime. When all was prepared, the king had his throne brought out for him to sit upon and enjoy the spectacle, and then he sent his soldiers to fetch the Scarecrow. Now, the one thing in all the world that the straw man really feared was fire. He knew he would burn very easily and that his ashes wouldn't amount to much afterwards. It wouldn't hurt him to be destroyed in such a manner, but he realized that many people in the land of Oz, and especially Dorothy and the royal Ozma, would feel sad if they learned of their old friend the Scarecrow was no longer in existence. In spite of this, the straw man was brave and faced his fiery fate like a hero. When they marched him out before the concourse, the people, he turned to the king with great calmness and said, "This wicked deed will cost you your throne, as well as much suffering, for my friends will avenge my destruction. Your friends are not here, nor will they know what I have done to you when you are gone and cannot tell them," answered the king in a scornful voice. Then he ordered the Scarecrow bound to a stout stake that he had driven into the ground, and the materials for the fire were heaped all around him. When this had been done, the king's brass band struck up a lively tune, and old Googly Goo came forward with a lighted match and set fire to the pile. At once the flames shot up and crept closer and closer to the Scarecrow. The king and all of his people were so intent upon the terrible spectacle that none of them noticed how the sky grew suddenly dark. Perhaps, they thought, that the loud buzzing sound, like the noise of a dozen moving railway trains, came from the blazing fagots, that the rush of wind was merely a breeze. But suddenly down swept a flock of orcs, 100 of them at the least, and the powerful currents of the air, caused by their revolving tails, sent the bonfire scattering in every direction, so that not one burning brand ever touched the Scarecrow. But that was not the only effect of this sudden tornado. King Krewel was blown out of his throne and went tumbling heels over head until he landed with a bump against the stone wall of his own castle. And before he could rise, a big orc sat upon him and held him pressed flat to the ground. Old Googly Goo shot up into the air like a rocket and landed on a tree where he hung by the middle on a high limb, kicking the air with his feet and clawing the air with his hands and howling for mercy like the coward he was. The people pressed back until they were jammed close together, while all the soldiers were knocked over and sent sprawling to the earth. The excitement was great for a few minutes and very fright and every the excitement was great for a few minutes, and every frightened inhabitant of Jinxland looked with awe and amazement at the great orcs whose descent had served to rescue the Scarecrow and conquer the King Cruel at one and the same time. There's that evil googly gook up in the tree hanging by his stomach. The orc who was the leader of the band soon had the Scarecrow free of his bonds. Then he said, "Well, we were just in time to save you, which is better than being a minute too late. You are now the master here, and we are determined to see your orders obeyed." With this, the orc picked up King Cruel's golden crown, which had fallen off of his head, and placed it upon the head of the Scarecrow, who in his awkward way then shuffled over to the throne and sat down in it. Seeing this, a rousing cheer broke from the crowd of people who had tossed their hats and waved their handkerchiefs and hailed the Scarecrow as their king. The soldiers joined the people in the cheering, for now they fully realized that their hated master was conquered, and it would be wise to show their goodwill to the conqueror. Some of them bound King Krewel with ropes and dragged him forward, dumping his body on the ground before the Scarecrow's throne. Googly Goo struggled until he finally slid off the limb of the tree and came tumbling to the ground. He then tried to sneak away and escape, but the soldiers seized and bound him beside Krewel. The tables are turned, said the Scarecrow, swelling out his chest until the straw within it crackled pleasantly, for he was highly pleased. But it was you and your people who did it, friend Orc, and for this time you may count me your humble servant. Well, friends, that's the end of chapter 18, and I can't wait to see what happens tomorrow because don't forget, something has to happen with Blinky the Witch because otherwise Princess Gloria's um, heart is frozen and she can't love the gardener pond. So we'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow, and I can't wait. I hope you're going to enjoy it with me tomorrow when you're maybe when you're home from school and before you go to bed at night. Until then, bye bye, and I'll see you tomorrow.